So you've almost made it to the end of Isabella. Well done. Hopefully you found this useful so far. The main purpose is to go into precise detail so that you get some of the kind of deeper ideas or the kind of nuances and subtleties of the tone and how it shifts, or the different moments of living and dead states that the characters are in. So when you transfer this to an essay in an exam or for a piece of coursework or something, you want the detail, you need precise detail, you need knowledge of the precise transitions in the story, because if you analyze that detail rather than just a general point, that's going to get you a lot higher marks. So it will benefit you definitely to go through it in precise detail. Also, hopefully it's kind of fun and interesting for you now that you've gotten over the language barrier. So my main purpose in going through all of these is to sort of give you all of the preciseness of the story without having the headache of trying to figure out what on earth everything means. I've already done that for you. It was a right pain going through it all, figuring out every single word, because some phrases and words most of it I understood, but even as a teacher, there's words sometimes Keats just invents words and no one knows what they mean except him, and you have to kind of figure out what he's on about. This is an example. So we'll jump into the analysis of it for the sake of keeping it quite short. But this line drove me a little bit mad for a while because I couldn't find any decent analysis on what it was. It was just kind of a vague, abstract analysis that people do. So she's digging into the grave and she turns up a dirty glove, a soiled glove, where her silk had played in purple fantasies. So Keats uses this word purple. You can call it color symbolism. He uses it as a sign of kind of eroticism, sexuality. If something's purple, it's like a bit almost like rude and offensively erotic in a certain way, especially for this time. Obviously, they're quite restrained. So the fact that this glove was playing with her dress, that in itself is erotic enough for Keats's time. Like, it's not kind of explicit eroticism in this time. So yeah, basically this glove used to play with the silk of her dress, and as it was doing that, it was dreaming up purple fantasies, romantic dreams. So the extent to which they have a fully kind of sexual relationship is very, very ambiguous, deliberately so, because they're not married, and so you don't know if they ever consummate their love with a full union, or if they just kiss, or if they just kind of look at each other and stare into each other's eyes. You don't know the level to which the eroticism is present in there, or kind of like the physical aspect of their relationship is present in the between them. But this is a suggestion that they took it quite far, and they were quite kind of physically committed to one another. So this glove, it brings up memories of the time that they spent together, and she kisses it with a lip that's colder than stone, because she knows that that part of her life is over. She's never going to have those experiences again. She puts it to her chest, where it dries and freezes utterly to the bone. So it's like a comforter, like a dainty that is made to stop a child from crying. Just holding a tiny piece of something owned by Lorenzo is a massive comfort to her. And then she begins her work again, and she doesn't stop except to throw back her veiling hair. So as she works, her hair is loose and it hangs down, which at this time is a sign perhaps of insanity or intense passion, or perhaps a reminder of the kind of intimate aspects of their relationship, because in the 19th century, you'd always keep your hair very tied up and very kind of restrained. He might just be drawing on the medieval tradition of hair versus his own time as well there, but to his audience, that's signaling something about emotion and looseness, the state of kind of half undress that she's in. So the nurse stands beside her wondering and just feels pity to the core. So we're meant to feel similar to this nurse, this sense of pathos. She feels so bad for her. She kneels down. Her hair is all hoary. It's like old and grey. And she puts her skinny hands to work as well. So they both start digging kind of crazily because Isabella's so caught up with it. The woman decides to help her. Takes them 3 hours of sore work before they actually feel the coffin, the kernel of the grave. And Isabella does not stamp and rave. Again, not one of my best lines. But yeah, you get the sense of it's hard work. This is another one of my favourite narrative interjections by Keats. Ah, wherefore all this wormy circumstance? Why linger at the yawning tomb so long? So he's like asking his reader, why? Wherefore means why. It's a Shakespearean word, actually. Like, wherefore art thou Romeo? So why all this worminess? Like, why am I talking about worms and dead things, rotting corpses? Why am I taking 3 stanzas to actually even describe to you what Isabella did with digging up the tomb? And at this point, I have to admit, I was actually thinking something similar. So I found it quite funny because I was translating the lines and I was like, yeah, I don't know why you spend so long on it, Keats. His justification is a bit weird. He says, for the gentleness of old romance, the simple plaining of a minstrel's song. So I think it's to give them space and time to be together before the final tragic sort of section. It's also deliberately slowing the pace of the narrative down at this point. So he's saying, I'm deliberately drawing it out. I know I'm drawing it out. I know I don't need 3 stanzas to describe the fact that she digs up the coffin, but I'm doing it because the lovers are in this state of gentle tenderness where they really love each other, and she's in a state of mourning, and there's something beautiful about the emotion there that I want to linger on, and I want to keep it kind of going. So he's deliberately drawing out this feeling of pathos and this feeling of pity and sadness that we feel for these lovers. So a bit like Perseus and Medusa, they cut away the head of Lorenzo. But he also says that it's also not like that because it's the head of a man who's gentle, and he's so kind of gentle and meek that he kind of suited death as well as he'd suited life, really. Like he wasn't a really energetic, kind of vivacious person. So it's sort of something peaceful about how he looked in death. And he says that the ancient harps have told us that love is never dead. It doesn't die. It lives on, immortal. There's an important line for themes if you're exploring the theme of love. So this is a really nice kind of final line to this stanza. It was love. It was cold. It was indeed dead, but it was not dethroned. It wasn't thrown off its dominion or its reign over them. So she's in the state of living. He's in the state of dying. The love that they have is cold and dead, but it's still there. It's still the thing that connects them, the thing that's the most powerful force or presence in Isabella's living life. And it's so strong that Lorenzo doesn't pass on after death. He becomes a spirit and he lingers around Isabella. So that's a nice line that emphasizes the primacy of love, how important love is to Keats and how powerful he thinks it is as an emotion. So she took, or they take the head home, the home head. They take home the head. And it's like a prize for Isabel. Prize is a good word. She combs it, its wild hair, with a golden comb. It's pretty gross what she does. She deals with its lashes, kind of like, neatens its eyelashes. She gets rid of all of the mud on its face, and she combs it and keeps sighing, and she kisses it and cries. So it's like an obsession for her. It's very dark and kind of twisted. It's a bit sickening in some ways, but it is quite in some ways in keeping with Catholic tradition of relics and reliquaries. So a relic in a Catholic sense, because Keats's time, people are not Catholic in England, but the time that he's drawing on the story from is, people are Catholic in Florence at that point. They are still even now. So the idea is that there's a relic, there's a piece of him, and he represented absolute spiritual kind of transcendence for her, the kind of love that they had. So she takes a piece of him and she keeps it with her, and it comforts her, and it, she looks after it, and it kind of makes her feel better as well. So if you look at relics and Catholic relics and the ideas behind them, you can think of Lorenzo's head less as some like uber goth kind of really twisted, disgusting thing, and more like a spiritual relic. It is really ambiguous how you're meant to interpret it. If you find it really gross, that's completely fine as well. But there's meant to be a kind of spiritual element there, I think, intentionally. So then she wraps it in a silk scarf that has Arabian flowers perfumed all over it. And just to make it smell a bit better because it's rotting. Again, humour kind of going on here a little bit, quite morbid humour. So it refreshes the smell of this head a little bit, and she buries it in a garden pot, covers it in earth, and then sets sweet basil, which her tears always water constantly. So she forgets everything. She forgets the stars, the moon, the sun, the blue above the trees. Nature and the world around her is not meaningful anymore without Lorenzo in it. She has no idea when it's day or night. She is in peace at this point, which is an important quote. She hangs over the sweet basil evermore and moistens it with her tears. And so it grows thick and green and beautiful. It smells more balmy than any other basil in Florence. So it's unbelievably strong, powerful plant grows out of this mouldering head and the tears of Isabella. I see this as a symbolic union between Lorenzo, who feeds the plant from below, and Isabella, who waters the plant from above. It's like this beautiful, energetic thing is created, like the basil plant represents life. And I feel like if Lorenzo had lived, they would have had children and they would have been able to kind of create in that way. But because he's dead, this is the only way that they can produce anything together. So it's sort of symbolic and metaphorical of the fact that they create this basil, and it becomes a famous piece of basil because everyone's very confused by it. So it's nurtured from human. It drew nurture besides and life from human fears, from the fast mouldering head, there shut from view. The jewel, it's a metaphor describing the head, safely casketed, safely kept in a chest, came forth and imperfumed leaflets spread. So the energy of this head and what it represents and the beauty of what Lorenzo was to Isabella bursts forth into the plant and spreads out through the perfume of the basil leaves. So it's interesting because it's like very dark and kind of twisted, in some ways a bit gross and over the top, in some ways quite gothic and frightening, and in other ways quite beautiful and transcendent and genuinely talking about truths to do with matter and how matter gets recycled on earth and how the earth is made of decaying bodies and life grows from that. So there's a lot of layers to it, and there's lots of ways you can interpret it, and it's important to be aware of those angles and tensions and potential readings. If you can get that into an essay where you look at more than one angle on something, that's always considered a really high level thing to do. So you don't necessarily have to say it's really dark or it's really beautiful or it's really silly and humorous. You can kind of explore those potential angles. So he waits again here. Oh, melancholy, linger here a while. Music, breathe despondingly. He starts talking in this way later on in the poem. So he's talking about kind of Greek trope saying sadness, stay here longer, music, breathe tragically, echo from some dark island unknown, like the river Lethe, which separates the world of the living from the world of the dead in Greek myth, sigh to us. Spirits in grief, lift up your heads. So he's kind of drawing on a classical tradition of apostrophe, again, directly addressing elements of the world and calling upon the power of those elements to kind of infuse his poem and the emotions of the poem at this moment. So it's not that useful to quote from, but it's interesting, kind of the classical technique that he uses there. So he's speaking to the words of the poem now. Moan here, all you syllables of woe, woe is sadness. From the deep throat of sad Melpomene. She is the muse of tragedy. So he's deliberately saying here it is a tragedy. It's been quite obvious up to this point that it's tragedy, but here it's undeniably tragic. So he's talking to the muse of tragedy, which again, ancient Greek and Roman poetry would do, drawing on the feeling and the mood and the emotions of what we expect in tragedy to kind of help us propel his own story along. And here he gives foreshadowing, which is important. Simple Isabel is soon to be among the dead. She withers like a palm cut by an Indian for its juicy balm. So she's pretty much dead by this point, and she's soon going to be fully dead. So there's no escaping, there's no hope by this point in the story. And it says, let her wither on her own. Don't try and speed up that process. Unfortunately, those brothers, those heathen mithers, her brothers, noticed the continual shower from her dead eyes. And lots of curious people wondered why such a beautiful woman of youth should be thrown aside, even though the brothers had marked her out to marry a nobleman. So people were too curious and they're too nosy. Again, all these other people represent society at large, like the main society. So society can't even let her die in peace. It has to be nosy, it has to intervene. So the brothers, furthermore, wonder why she's drooping by the basil. She sat drooping by the basil green, so as she dies, the basil grows and lives. Kind of a comment on generations as well, and how older generations die back and new generations prosper. They wondered what this might mean, and they couldn't believe that this nothing, the very nothing of the basil, would have the power to get rid of her youth and her beauty and her happiness. So they're not done, the brothers, with their evil deeds. They cannot let be. They can't just kind of, move on. They have to meddle again. And we're going to see in the last little section of the poem what they do further to Isabella.